Hey, everybody, welcome back. It's Tuesday, June 15th. Cliff and I are here today with our guest, David Pakman. David is an Argentine-born, which I didn't even realize until I was looking at this a minute ago, American progressive political commentator. He is the host of the YouTube, Twitch, talk radio program, The David Pakman Show. And just to give you a sense of how well that show is doing, I believe David's got about 1 million or more followers on YouTube for his show. So David has really made an incredible impact. David is also, again, I'm like forgetting my David Pakman history here, but David is an immigrant or one-time immigrant. His family, he was born in Argentina, Buenos Aires, immigrated here when he was a kid, which is why your English is so good, because my mom immigrated from Greece at 8, and her English is perfect, but some people still hear an accent, but otherwise I don't, and it's also flawless English. But does anybody ever hear an accent with you or not?
Never.
Okay, because you were here at 5, so you really were able to nail it.
Yeah.
Nice.
But with your
Are
parents,
you fluent in Spanish too?
Oh, you got
I
it.
am indeed.
Excellent.
But you spoke Spanish at home, I'm guessing, and you still nailed the English. Interesting. Just because, again, the Greeks, I can tell you, it's funny you'll meet Greek Americans who basically have a little bit of a Greek accent. And I've met them and gone, oh, where were you born? Cincinnati. I'm like, no, but like, and literally.
We actually have lots of Greeks here, dude. Our chili is based on your heritage, John.
Chile? Really?
Yeah, it's Greek. Oh. The Greeks who settled here did their whole thing. I'm telling you.
Greek chili. Okay. Wouldn't be as hot. Anyway, so David, thanks for joining us. Pretty much, our show is always just the topics of the day. Going through your Twitter feed, it's you've been kind of on everything we've been on. But I'm curious first, and I'd said this before the show, just to ask people kind of what is your political philosophy? And let me just tell you, I think Cliff and I, in talking about this, had a supposition that you were to the left of us. And now I'm kind of wondering from reading your feed if you really are. What are you, David?
I don't know. I mean, Cliff and I have hung out a little bit, and
we know each other from back in the day.
Some of the things I've heard him say make me question that. No, I mean, I don't know. I consider myself basically in line with Northern European social democracy in terms of economic perspective, in terms of a lot of foreign policy stuff. To probably cut to what is right now kind of most prevalent in the splits within the left that are taking place. I don't play coy with any of the authoritarian strongmen that some on the left are sort of toying around with right now. You won't hear me defend Putin. You won't hear me defend Assad.
Gee, who could you be talking about?
You won't hear me. You won't hear me defend Nicolas Maduro or Xi, or deny what's going on with the Uyghurs. I mean, I don't get involved in any.
But can I say something along those lines, David? I mean, no further. I mean, do we even consider them on the left anymore? I kind of feel when you get to the point where you're defending authoritarians who've committed genocide, for lack of a better term. I mean, what's going on with the Uyghurs is genocide. What Assad is doing. I mean, I think there's a bunch of people that many of us thought were on the left, and maybe they were at one time, and they've either changed due to profit motive or belief or whatever. I mean, I don't know. That was what I would say. You're legitimate. You're really the left. I don't know that they are.
Well,
Does that make sense?
The reason that it makes total sense. The reason I hate to just start saying you're not on the left and you're not on the left is people also do it to me.
You get a toaster. You get a toaster. Sorry.
People do it to me when I fail to say, for example, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict comes down simply to Israel is bad. And that's it, right? Like I don't, that's not my analysis. And then people say, you're not really on the left then. And so I don't want to participate in the same type of gatekeeping that I'm the victim of, in a sense.
Okay. And I want to be very clear though, like I don't believe in the gatekeeping either. I do think that when you get to a point where you're sort of supporting authoritarians and what they're doing, I will gatekeep that. And I think we can disagree on, should the minimum wage be $15 an hour or $20 an hour? Should we have fought back in the day for marriage, a gay marriage as something in the courts, or should we have fought it, as something in different states? I think there's difference in strategies. I think there's difference. Should healthcare, we've had battles over, should we absolutely, is single payer the only answer, or the fact that Germany and Belgium and others have made multi-payer with, very much regulation environments work? And those are debates I'll have. And I can't say when somebody's like, well, you think any system that gets everybody healthcare is okay. We have to ban all private healthcare. And to me, I agree with you on that. But I really do start excluding people from at least my thought of that you being anywhere towards progressive. If you can sit there and say America's awful, but Vladimir Putin, man, that's a good guy.
But don't you both feel like that? I will say this, as much as, and Chris and I, Chris, whatever your name is, Cliff and I,
John, Mike, call me whatever you'd like.
I would say, I think you may be a little more amiable about this, and that's probably a good thing because, frankly, you've got 1 million YouTube followers and I've got 10,000. So, don't take my advice. But Cliff and I think, might be a little more confrontational on those battles on the left. But I will say, thankfully, I think it is a very, very, very small number who are the crazy Putin Russia defenders, who like Greenwald. But I mean, he's such a small, although he's got a lot of followers, my concern with the left, again, we get into discussions about the squad. I've got issues with Omar and some of the stuff she does, and people don't like when I bring it up. But that's my concern with the left, is whether we're going too far left or not, and among people who actually have influence. Whereas I feel like the Greenwald crowd, and don't name names, fine. But, you're defending Russia. You're just, I don't know what you are. You're kind of wacky fringe that I don't even consider a significant impact, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you that it's not a huge, well, so here's how I would say it. It's not a huge slice of my audience, and what can be deceptive. Sure. And I was just talking actually to Cenk Uygur about this. What can be deceptive is when I touch the stuff that goes against the orthodoxy of that slice, they become very loud, and I start getting emails like, I used to follow you, but now I have to stop. Right. And I used to be a paid subscriber, but now I have to cancel. Right. And a lot of that is not true. So they want me to, I think they are significant, but they're not a significant part of my audience.
Interesting. Okay.
And I think that I need to kind of keep that perspective.
Right. They're out there, and I think there's decent numbers. I think I would agree with that, David. I mean, I obviously don't know your audience, but I think there's more of them who are regular everyday people, not the sort of huge influencers than maybe John admitted there. But at the same time, I mean, clearly just from what you just told us, the kinds of stuff you're talking about, because John and I also have what I would call nuanced, and I try to bring context to everything we talk about. It's easy to demagogue about stuff. It's easy to say, oh, well, this is all this way. That's but it's the same thing. Like Israel and Palestine is one of those things too, where I try to bring context to that argument of where there's wrong on various sides and where there's, and I get yelled at for it. Yeah. And the same thing with some of the other things we do. So I appreciate that you're not just pandering to have as big a subscription base as possible. You're saying it how you feel it.
Do you actually have a sense of who your audience is? And I say this as, I've been doing, I've had an audience, I guess, since like the mid 90s in a sense, because I was doing a lot of email stuff back then for organizations, then I was blogging, and that became a big thing. And now it's more of this and Twitter and everything else. But with each segment along the way, I always found it kind of difficult to understand who my audience was. And part of it, and it's two sides of the same coin, is what you're saying too, whereas I'd get criticism, first of all, and I'd be trying to figure out, okay, is that my, criticism always makes you worried, and you're like, oh my God, is that my audience? Or is that some fringe? Or nowadays, not even fringe, is it not my audience? Or nowadays, is it fake? Is it being ginned up? Is it for example, there's this, and I've mentioned it before, and like, that Ben guy at NBC got on my case and was like, oh, there's no such thing. The one who debunks all the, who follows the extreme right online. And
Jacobs?
What's his name? Ben, you know what I mean?
He's the reporter, but you mean the reporter, like the NBC reporter.
He's the young MSNBC guy who covers
I think it's
all
Ben
the...
Jacob.
Yeah. He got on my case because I noted, for example, these, young, again, who knows, Twitter, hammer and, always the rose, often the hammer and sickle, and gay, LGBT, like the rainbow flag in their profile. And they're the ones who would swarm me over stuff. But it was always a swarm, and they were almost always from England, according to their profile. And you'd kind of sit there, and it would bug me, but at the same time, I'd go, this is not... Have you ever had a feeling that, like now, for example, do you think your YouTube audience, do you know who watches you?
I mean, I think that the tougher thing about YouTube is that it's really easy to just like snipe on by and very quickly leave a bunch of comments that make it seem as though you have a bigger presence than you really do. So I tend to go more by the emails that I get, where if someone really takes the time, I mean, some of them are horrible and some of them end up, forwarded to the FBI. But for the most part, the email, somebody who's going out of their way to find my email or contact form on my website and send an email, I feel like that is more thoughtful than just like someone leaving 10 comments really quickly on YouTube without giving it much of a second thought. And that might be the first time they sort of ever heard of me. The people who call into my show, et cetera, I think that the relationship with like someone who listens to my hour podcast every day, I'm going to listen much more to that person than to some random person with a username that's all numbers on YouTube. So I think in that sense, I do have an understanding of who the audience is. And, it's mostly pretty progressive people, primarily between 25 and 55, who are relatively well educated. I don't think there's any big shock in terms of who the audience is.
Right. Yes. It's like probably often who you'd see at a Warren rally or I mean, I'm guessing not just Warren. You could go to Pete Buttigieg. I wasn't trying to sort of pigeonhole, but yeah, the kinds of like, I think, mainstream left. Right?
Yeah. And I mean, listen, I supported Bernie in the primaries and a lot of my audience is Bernie, but where some people got mad at me was when I said, listen, guys, Bernie doesn't have the votes and Biden on paper has a totally respectable platform given what Obama was and given what the alternative is. And I'm voting for Biden. Like I just was very upfront with my audience relatively early. That angered a lot of people.
So you weren't sort of going for the Jimmy Dore thing?
No. Oh my God. No. No.
Just kidding.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I shouldn't even make those jokes. I'll get you in trouble.
Well, but I'd say you sound like a political realist, which I like because, again, it's interesting. You're a political realist who doesn't approach this with animus is the combination. Because I think Cliff and I try to be realistic. Look, we've got our views. We tend to be, Cliff's New York. I'm Greek Chicago. So like we both are kind of out there with our views. We talk fast. I talk. Just we are what we are. But it's,
and I'd just add quickly, John, moving to the Midwest and living in Cincinnati now for a decade, there's a whole new sort of layer of perspective that I actually didn't have as an East Coaster. So we all try to learn with life. But I also, I really don't want to cut you up, but I think it's important to say what I like about this and what I like about you, David, is that I don't do that kind of gatekeeping except for off to the extreme, that I try to say a lot of us can be good people that are liberal-minded, progressive minded, whatever you want to say. We may disagree on some stuff, but that doesn't mean I have to demonize you. I go after some people. I do. I go after Glenn. I did today, but I do it when I think that they're operating in bad faith. You know what I mean? And when you seem to come in good faith and say, hey, I just disagree with you on this. Well, that's what it's supposed to be about.
Medicare for all
to have
during
those conversations,
right? That battle over Medicare. Sorry, Cliff.
Go ahead, John. You go ahead.
The battle over Medicare for all during the primaries drove me nuts. Because I was watching this and I'm like, first of all, the esoterica of it drives me crazy. I mean, if it's your issue, of course, you've got to get into the esoteric details. But the idea that if you didn't accept, and I don't remember if it was Elizabeth Warren versus Bernie versus whomever, but if you didn't accept their exact program, you wanted something slightly different, you were a sellout. And it just, I don't know. Anyway, let's get away from that, I guess, Anyway, it's just something that sort of bothers me. And I worry a little bit on our side whether that's growing a little bit of this infighting. And I'm even seeing it, for example, maybe you can weigh in, you're Latino, but I was reading yesterday, Lin-Manuel Miranda is in trouble again. Apparently he was in trouble with Hamilton, which I did not know. Initially with some people because slaveholders, he was honoring slaveholders. And this time is really interesting. The Latinos in his new movie In the Heights, which I'm told is really great, and it's on HBO and I'm going to watch it, aren't dark enough. He didn't include black-skinned Latinos in lead roles. Now, I know nothing about this, but as an outsider who watches it in my own gay community, the LGBT community, and certainly seeing like the women's community where, black feminists hate white feminists. And I mean, it's just like, I'll throw this to you because we've both been talking too much, but I worry sometimes that we're destroying each other with our individuality sometimes on the left.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can't weigh in about that particular thing. I'm not following all of the cultural issues super closely, but I mean, an example I'm reminded of was when there was this situation where the Women's March leadership felt that Jewish women were not intersectional enough to be on the leadership because Jews are privileged. And it's like, guys, come on, I can't think of anything more toxic than that. That's like the epitome. That's the fork of 3 or 4 of the worst instincts that are currently festering on the left. And I said at the time, I don't think this is the majority of the left. But I think that they are very loud, similar to that slice of my audience that gets very loud and starts to make me think, whoa, is this really the vast majority? And remember, the vast majority I never hear from, actually. That's the truth, because it's people busy living their lives. But yeah, it's hard for me to say it's a growing problem. I think it's a louder problem, but that may be amplified by social media and some of the other things that are going on.
The one cricket in the field is louder than all the sleeping cows.
Right.
It's some adage I heard years ago, and I'm maiming it a little, but I love the concept of, because it's frankly, Cliff.
And social media only amplifies that, as we know.
Yes.
Right? That's what I mean. It's what we do for a living to some degree, Cliff. You know, I mean, when on our political side, or our political consulting side, is how do you amplify voices and sometimes make them seem louder than they are? That's what the internet is in many ways.
Right.
You know,
but no question. No question.
Now, what I've got to look here and see can I ask you something? How, and some of this, I really wanted this. We're going to get into a lot of the substance too, but I'm just personally curious about you as David Pakman, sort of political guy. I know Cliff, and Cliff, you can even get into this with him, but I was curious, sort of, you grew up, or you were born into a Jewish family. Are you very Jewish? Because I know, Cliff, you can sort of explain what my question means on that front.
Well, I'm not Jewish, but he's not. I mean, if the question is, am I religious? I'm not. No, but certainly I identify culturally very much so. But no, I'm not religious at all.
I was just curious where you exactly culturally and ethnically. I was curious kind of where you fit in, because like Cliff and I will talk a lot about these issues, and he'll always note the same thing, that he's.
Well, I always feel, I feel like I have to note it, and maybe that's like I overdo it. It's just I always feel like when if I'm speaking for a Jewish audience, I feel a little bit like a fraud, just because I haven't been in a temple in a lot of years, and we don't. I mean, my wife is Presbyterian. That's who I fell in love with, and if it had been somebody Jewish or Muslim, that's who I would have married. So I mean, that's led even more. So even though I came from a very secular family, even now that much more mixed. I mean, we do Hanukkah for the kids just because, sure, and Christmas both, and stuff like that, but. There's no doubt that I sometimes am hesitant to speak for Jews because I feel like, I almost feel like a poser.
Well, for me, it's not so much about like speaking for Jews, but I think that there's a lot of people who may not understand that Judaism, you're talking about an ethno-religious group, and it's different than, say, I'm now Catholic, I'm now Baptist, no, I'm now nothing. Right. That when you explain to people, sometimes they'll say, I did my ancestry DNA and it came back 100% Jewish. And they said, how does it know your religion? And then I have to explain, well, no, it doesn't. Right.
Oh, that's funny.
If you convert to Judaism, you are not ethnically Jewish. And if you convert out, you remain ethnically, you have to kind of explain this. So I think that's why sometimes it's a thing, because it's a bit of a different, ethno-religious groups are different than just, this is my religion. And a lot of people understandably don't know that.
So the point that he's making right now, folks, if you don't know, is that we're still stuck with Larry Kudlow. Even though he converted out, he's still ethnically one of us, and it disturbs me. I just thought I'd point that out.
I did not know that.
Yeah, he converted to Catholicism, but it doesn't, he still is, we're still stuck with him.
Sure.
All right, I bring the comic relief to the show.
A fair disclaimer.
Let me ask you one last question on that topic, just because I was telling Cliff before the show, I was thinking back to 2016, and I'm assuming you were on Twitter and active in 2016. All the neo-Nazi alt-right trolls that we were dealing with back then, and Twitter was not dealing with, and really horrific stuff, folks. I mean, we're talking, I even received it, God, and I'm not even Jewish, people sending you not just pictures of Auschwitz, but they would send, there was this one meme of a cartoon drawn of an oven, and they would put your face in the oven. And I mean, just horrific stuff. And Twitter wasn't doing nearly enough. And at the time, Jonathan Weisman, who probably was the New York Times bureau chief, I'm thinking at the time, talked about getting off Twitter, and he may have actually gotten off Twitter, but he also wrote an opinion piece in the Times, which was fascinating for their lead political writer to do. They don't really write opinion pieces, talking about how he never really felt Jewish growing up. He's Jewish, but literally it's his ethnicity that he didn't give a lot of thought to. So I think even in that sense, he wasn't super Jewish, even ethnically, and how everything that happened to him on Twitter that year with the neo-Nazis and everything else and Twitter ignoring him for the first time in his life, and I'm paraphrasing a little here, he felt under attack and actually unsafe for being a Jew. And but it also opened his eyes to that whole world, because to a degree, and it's really worth Googling, folks, the article. I think the article, the premise is that he almost was thinking that we were, in a post-anti-Semitic world, in the same way that sometimes we think a post-gay world, where, homophobia is done, at least for the gays.
In the 1990s, we thought we were post a lot of things that have all come back.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, one of the things about it is, and this is sometimes not super popular to say in some circles, is that because of some of the tropes and stereotypes about Jews in the US over the last 20 years as successful and privileged, there's a lot of looking the other way about this stuff, where a much higher threshold needs to be met often before some people will take it seriously, and it allows it to fester, and people, terms of service on platforms might sort of not deal with it as seriously as they should for a while, et cetera. And it's sort of like a vicious circle of the tropes themselves make it so that it's taken less seriously. And as a result, it grows even more. It's like a feedback loop.
Yeah. And I think people don't get on some level, and this is what I can say, this is where I do feel Jewish, is when you see, there's that Italian soccer player, for example, who wrote something, and because he's higher profile, it was out there. He plays for the New York Red Bulls, the professional soccer team in New York, and I think he's Jewish, and background, name, and his own. And a group of kids walked up to him on the Upper West Side and started yelling things, and at him, anti-Semitic comments. And I grew up in New York City, and to me, almost that was shocking, because it's hard imagining that happening. But you start seeing these stories from around the country. And it's true. It's almost like there's this, because some Jews have been successful economically or educationally, this sort of view of you're privileged, you don't have to worry about anything. And I got to tell you, I have been in a few of those environments before, and you feel threatened. I mean, you do. You feel like someone could hurt you just because of who you are. And I sometimes think that's overlooked, and we're thrown in, as I like to say when I'm joking about it, I'm like, the great thing about being, light-skinned and Jewish and male and straight is everybody hates you.
Right. There's a serious discourse. There's some really good writing about this, about how Ashkenazi Jews, this doesn't apply to a lot of Sephardic and Mizrahim, but
tell people what that means. I know, but
so these are basically just slightly different ethnic groups, and so-called white European Jews tend to be Ashkenazi. If your roots are in Ukraine, and if your intermediate roots, so to speak, after being out of the Middle East, are in Eastern Europe, you tend to be Ashkenazi. That would be my
family, and I think from what David is saying here, his family too.
Exactly. Yeah. You are what's called white passing in most modern kind of Western society, in that if you just walk by someone on the street, you can't easily identify them as something other than white. That plays a big role in the kind of invisibility of anti-Semitism in some circles, because it's very easy to just say, well, passing you on the street, you look white, therefore there's really no conversation to be had here. But part of it is what Cliff's talking about, which is you can still be in these situations where you realize that you actually are being targeted, but nobody can tell that it applies to you necessarily because of how you look. It's slightly better, but it doesn't necessarily make it not a problem.
And I'd say, actually, in some ways, you end up hearing a lot more.
You do, because people don't have their guard up. Exactly.
They don't know.
Interesting.
The interesting thing, when John brought up sort of aspects of it reminded me of the United Kingdom. So I studied my junior year at a British school. And there already, I would say, was a much more active far left in the United Kingdom at that point. That was very pro-Irish rights and other, these kinds of things, anti-colonialism and this, and very anti-Israel, but to the point of well beyond it being an Israel thing, to sharing sort of anti-Jewish stereotypes. And that has grown, that part of things in the United States, and I've seen more of it since. At least my college campus, that didn't really exist. And at this British school, like, I heard awful things, right? They had no idea that I was Jewish. Again, light skin, blue eyes, could pass as whatever. And that led me to overhear this stuff. And that was one of the first times in my life I really was like, wow, when I experienced it and sort of heard the dark underbelly that I wouldn't have otherwise have witnessed.
Yeah, I've told the story before on my show, but when I was in high school, I used to work at the now defunct electronics retailer Circuit City, and I had a situation where there was a coworker who came up to me and casually just said, "Those customers I was dealing with, they were just such Jews." And I said, "What do you mean? What does that mean?" He said, they wouldn't stop asking me for a deal. Now, part of me goes, right, Black and Hispanic people don't want deals. They want to be overcharged. But when I said to him, that's a really inappropriate thing to say. Did you even know that I was Jewish? And his reaction was to say, "Sorry, I shouldn't have said it in front of you."
There you go. Yeah.
It was a totally okay. I mean, it was true what I was saying. I just should have had.
Yeah.
And it's like just a total misunderstanding of what's even happening in the world,
Yeah. And by the way, you should see my Latino aunt from Panama, who's a Greek immigrant. So, Latino-ish, right? She's more Greek, who came to Chicago, and she was haggling over some stuff in Marshall Fields in front of my mom. And my mom's Greek, but she was dying. And the aunt is literally haggling with the woman, and the woman, Marshall Fields, which was like, Marshall Fields.
I know.
And she wasn't even Latino. She was Greek. So we've all got a little of that in us, but
yeah.
Oh God. Let's get to some of the political issues. You had just tweeted, and I mean, Cliff and I have been talking about it a lot, but who hasn't been? I don't know if you were joking or if you were serious about worrying about August, with Trump claiming he's going to get back in office in August, and whether there was going to be violence again. Were you just sort of throwing it out there? Or are you actually concerned about this?
No, I mean, I'm not so worried that I am planning to be away in August, but it's just coincidence. I'm not so worried that I'm planning to be in a bunker or something like that. But I think I'm not saying it's likely, but I do think that there's a reasonable chance that when, again, nothing happens and Trump's not president on August 31st, that because there's a little bit more of a buildup to this one than I think March 4th was a date, but there wasn't really much of a buildup to it.
No.
With the reports now from the New York Times, Washington Post, and the National Review about Trump is telling people this about reinstatement, and it is more of a thing. And you've got them, Mike Pillow out there doing who knows whatever he's doing, et cetera. Right. I think that there's a greater chance. Also, it being summer, maybe that will sort of add to it to some degree. I have some concern about it. Yeah.
Do you think that's the intent?
Well,
wait, Cliff, let me ask him this real quick though. What I mean is,
go ahead.
I feel like if I were Trump, if I were on the right trying to gin people up, I would want them to keep getting disappointed. I would want to keep doing what they did on January 6th. I would want to keep pulling the rug out, Lucy pulling the football, not because they'd get pissed at me, but they'd think, "Oh, we got screwed again." Right? You're keeping the grievance building. We know Trump won after doing all the, the audits in Pennsylvania. Well, Pennsylvania, they want one. In Arizona, they're still doing a fake audit. With those audits now, we know he won, and he was supposed to be reinstated in August, and now they're not letting us happen. So it's another reason for a revolution. I worry because I think it's not only a potential side effect of what they're doing. I think it's it's not the glitch. It's the, whatever the expression is.
It's a feature, not a bug. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if eventually what they're going to get to is, hey, none of that stuff worked, so we really got to vote in 2022. That would be like the best case, most optimistic version of this is like a really not well-crafted, but it's a forward-looking get out the vote. That's the most benign explanation for all of this. I hesitate to think that that's the explanation, though.
Me too. I mean, again, you keep them purposely in grievance. I mean, the operation is about selling things after all.
Right.
It's much easier to sell to people that are just out of their mind and angry and, hey, this will make you feel better. Rick Perlstein back in the day wrote a great article on the merging of sort of a lot of the far right and the sort of grift, culture out there. The sort of, a great thing on Mike Huckabee, with the, here's your biblical cure to cancer. If you just, sending that kind of thing out to the Newsmax list. And so I always think of it from the economic perspective, and Trump is more almost transparent about that than anybody else, not on purpose, but you can tell like it's about money, right? So I think that it's going to be constant. Right? I mean, they've got nothing to lose doing it.
There's very little downside. And, it's clear Trump wants to be the kingmaker for 2022. If he can start being the person who's also kind of divvying up donations and saying, I'll support the correct Republicans and tell you which are the ones not to be supported. And if he can get some wins in 2022, and if people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, et cetera, get reelected, if they run for reelection, I don't know if they're all running, but I assume they are, it strengthens Trump's case for 2024, if that's something that he's interested in. And at minimum, it's something to raise money on from gullible people.
Trump is actually going after real quick, he's going after the Pennsylvania folks now too. He's trying to get the state officials who didn't support, I guess, the fraud audit or whatever. Now he's trying to basically hurt them in the next election, but whatever. What were you saying, Cliff?
Well, I was interested in David's take sort of as an analyst. We've talked a lot about, like, if you could call it the Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema problem on the show here. Again, I try to leave my anger and passion out of it because I have moments of getting quite angry at Joe Manchin. But I try to do this from a sort of political perspective, just do an analysis of their different cases, right? I mean, Kirsten Sinema is from a state where they elected a progressive Secretary of State. Kelly is to the left of her, the other senator they elected. A few other members statewide. Joe Biden won the state. It's moving in a left direction. I very much believe that if she doesn't get in my opinion, if she doesn't get a primary opponent and a good one, we're failing. Joe Manchin's a different story. Like we're never going to get anything to the left of him. We get rid of him. Who knows what we get from West Virginia? And I feel like that has to be handled by Biden, Schumer, or other people who can pressure him from the inside. Because I just don't think we have the kind of power. Again, it's not about what I'm angry about. It makes me feel good. It's about getting results. I'm wondering if you think, is that a too facile an analysis from your point of view? What have you been talking about?
That's basically been my view, with the idea of immediately primary Manchin. If you manage to defeat Manchin with Bernie, right, or whatever, it's very likely that seat goes to a Republican, and then you don't even have someone that you can pressure. Whereas the Arizona situation, I think that the Manchin one is more likely to be a Pyrrhic victory if there is to be a victory. Whereas with Sinema, I think that she's really at risk, especially given the direction that Arizona has been going in. And, as I've said before, Biden has bragged for a long time about he's the deal maker, he's the negotiator, he's brought left and right together, Republicans and Democrats. Well, just convince this one Democrat about a few things, let's actually put that experience and use that to get this one guy to support some of the relatively uncontroversial things you want to do that are quite popular, really, with the American people, infrastructure being at the top of the list. So,
and in West Virginia, for that matter.
And for West Virginia, which is a disaster on infrastructure.
Right.
That's generally my view. And I think that at whatever level of disaster Joe Manchin is for Democrats, a Republican would be a bigger disaster.
Yeah. Right. And I agree. There is pressure on Biden there, but it's true. This is, when people are unfair, and I always disclose, I wrote some TV ads for Joe Biden. And so I don't work for him now. And I think on some things I give him credit when I think he's done a great job. But I do think on this, it's very clear. He ran on this. This is what he said he'd be able to do. And so it's true. We can't pressure Manchin electorally the way we can Sinema. So it really is. It's on Joe Biden to get it done. He said he could. And this is going to be a big test of whether he can or not, because again, we're looking at big things here. It's not just we're arguing around the edges here. This is about democracy. It's pretty straightforward.
No doubt.
As a Bernie primary supporter, how good a job has Joe Biden done?
Well, I think that the rollout of vaccination has been phenomenal, essentially. The best understanding we have right now is that he was handed essentially nothing from the Trump administration. Right. And now basically vaccination in the US is the envy of the world. I know people from Argentina coming to Miami to get vaccinated. Now they're allowed to. At one point they were doing it surreptitiously. Now I guess Miami says just come show up. I think that's been fantastic. COVID stimulus, he got it done within a few months. I know that there were some people who said, well, he said he would do it right away and he didn't. I think 3 months is reasonable for how the federal government moves, 2.5, 3 months. I think that was really good. There are certain things, a lot of progressives are furious with Joe Biden on, like, he hasn't yet done student loan debt forgiveness. I never believed he cared about that issue. I never thought he was going to do any forgiveness. So I'm not let down in the sense that I just never thought that was really going to be something he was going to pursue.
Right.
He
doesn't like the issue either, clearly. I mean,
there's criticism that he hasn't yet done the public option, on which I say, let's wait a little bit. I think we've got to allow some time. But I do think that by October 1st, there has to be some additional big legislative accomplishment to point to in order to start the 2022 period, which will probably start in January, with like a case that you should elect more Democrats if that's the case that he plans to make. So I think he needs infrastructure or something else by October 1st.
We had Paul Begala on, and Paul said he thinks August is when it starts, the next election season. So he felt by August, we've got to sort of get everything done. We're going to get done.
That's even more aggressive then. Yeah.
Well, and again, maybe you have more of a sense on infrastructure. I keep reading sort of conflicting things. 1 minute they're stopping negotiating, next minute he's agreeing with them. And I would argue again, like, I always felt like if he can get a good bipartisan deal, get it, right? You said you're going to run on that. Getting 1/4 of what you said you were going to do, which is what it's looking like, that to me doesn't feel like a good bipartisan deal.
I totally agree with you. Yeah. And again, it's one of these things where you're negotiating often when the negotiation is with Republicans and then none of them vote for it anyway, right? So it's like Biden wants 2 on COVID stimulus. I don't remember if Biden started at 1.9 or was it 2.1 or whatever. And then Republicans say, what about 600 million? What about 700 million? Right. It ends up being 1.9. They get 0 votes anyway. So what was gained? And my view is, invite them to the White House so that you've done it. You've allowed them to be part of the conversation. Do some kind of compromise, even if it's symbolic. But then at a certain point, if you're going to get 0 votes, then just do it with 50 votes. This is now talking about infrastructure, but you've got to get Joe Manchin and Sinema on board if you're going to do that.
Right.
And that's where it gets difficult. Yeah.
Right. I don't think.
Well, are they both? Yeah. Is Sinema not on board on infrastructure right now?
I actually am not sure. She may be. It may just be Manchin that's not.
Right. So really, again, you got to get him on board. And I just it may not be the pressure of electoral. It may be more his personal relationships you use to leverage in West Virginia,
which
he knows
West
Virginia needs it. Yeah. Hell, the Democrat turned Republican governor there, Justice, came out and said he wanted the original infrastructure bill.
Yeah.
To the left of what Manchin wants, because he gets that their infrastructure is awful. I know. When I go from Cincinnati here to Washington, D.C., when I decide not to fly and we drive through West Virginia, I mean, my God, it's ridiculous and it's needed. So I would think you might use some of those voices back in West Virginia to prod him and be like, dude, we need this, right? It's jobs, it's security, it's whatever. So
absolutely.
Right. Well, and in the end, as you said, there's really, AOC, for example, kind of went off the other day saying we shouldn't be Manchin shouldn't be worrying about Republicans. We shouldn't be negotiating with Republicans. But that is the situation we're in with the 50-50 Senate. And it's something that frustrates me a little. Well, it frustrates me a lot politically because I want to get stuff done. But it frustrates me in terms of sort of educating the grassroots, because they may not be up on politics as much as we are. And I'm not even talking to people watching the show because they are up on it. But Democrats in general, or liberals or progressives in general, probably do think Biden's negotiating too much with Republicans and but they don't realize, even though that's Biden's way, he also has no choice because of the Manchin factor. Manchin said he wanted a bipartisan bill or he wasn't going to do it. And at least so far, he's saying he's not willing to do it by reconciliation, which means you don't have to worry about, which means getting around the filibuster. So for both ways, Manchin's not willing. You got to get Manchin or, and AOC was out there publicly criticizing Manchin. And I was like, no, you're doing an ad. You're doing a campaign ad for him. That doesn't help him in West Virginia.
It is crazy that for a lot of this stuff, you either need to convince 10 Republican senators, which is like, how is that possibly going to happen?
It's not.
Or then you're just trying to convince your own party. It's a crazy situation. It really is.
Yeah, but it is hard.
I would say that, when you count 7 or so and 1 or 2 others voted for this January 6th are jello-spined senator who thankfully is leaving, Rob Portman, who didn't vote for impeachment but did vote for January 6th. Even if you add him in, he may be the only one who was on this January 6th commission, but not in the other one. That's 8 Republicans. So your ceiling you start with really of anybody who's even slightly reasonable are 8 people.
Right.
You're not getting 10 no matter what you do. So you start off with you cannot defeat a filibuster at its current level, no matter what. You know what I mean? And that's why it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right. But I do think David, again, David did make a good point, which is like on some level, Biden ran on that he was going to be able to bring people together. So if Manchin's the problem, he's got to get down to business at some point and get Manchin across the line on infrastructure and some other things. It is on him to do that because I don't know where else we're getting any pressure on him from.
Right. And in the aftermath, if Biden runs for re-election and his list of accomplishments is too short, having run on, I'm the longtime deal maker and I can negotiate with everybody, and you couldn't even get your own party on the same page. Right. It's not going to be a strong case for re-election.
Right. No, it's not. So, at worst, he's got to find a way to get people win a couple new seats, which is possible in the Senate in 22. With Pennsylvania open and Wisconsin with Ron Johnson off speaking Russian or whatever he's doing right now. And, even here in Ohio, we've got Tim Ryan and Val Demings getting in Florida. But my bigger worry is, of course, if they make it so that you can't win electorally with what they're doing in these states that are gerrymandered, that's where it goes back to Manchin again.
Yep. And I don't know. I don't know how much you guys have talked about HR1. I'm not super optimistic about that.
Why?
Sadly, I'm not hugely either.
Because of Manchin, obviously, but why else?
That's why.
Or just because of Manchin, you mean?
Well, if he won't vote, David, if he will not support.
I'm referring, that. And I don't know, maybe the support there may be other Senate Democrats where the support is soft. I don't know.
Okay, but even so, they need 60 because it's voting. If he won't overturn the filibuster. Yeah. So he said that Lisa Murkowski has already agreed to vote for it. Wonderful. Right. So we have 51 votes. And maybe, Susan Collins will frown her way into voting for it and we'll get 52. Right. And there's maybe in any normal world, 1 or 2 others that are even gettable.
Did you see what McConnell did last night?
Oh, you mean about the Supreme Court or something else? He said if there's a vacancy in 2024, he'll do everything he can to prevent Biden from filling it. Yeah, wait. And
then he got asked, "What about 2023?" 2 years before the election, and he said, "We'll just have to wait and see about that."
Right.
So he wouldn't even commit.
Of course.
I know, of course, but this is why I feel again like we don't take it to them the way they take it to us. We just don't. Right. They wouldn't even, first of all, I will say this, as much as I'm sympathetic to the Manchin problem, meaning, what do you do with the guy? They'd know what to do with the guy. They'd cut the guy's balls off and stick him down his throat. They metaphorically, they'd find a way to deal with Manchin,
Well, what I've said before is I'm not for, quote, stooping to their level in certain ways, which includes lying in the way that they sometimes lie, or criminality,
overthrowing democracy, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But on certain things like, hey, here's a way we could crowbar something through. Right. And, but maybe next time they get a chance, they'll hold it over our heads. What does it matter? Look at what McConnell's now openly saying he might do. Yeah. In those areas, I think it's just whatever the method is to do it, you just do it.
Right. Right.
I agree.
They stole a Supreme Court seat. We didn't steal several of theirs, although we didn't have a way of stealing it. So now that we're back, they're stealing more. It's like,
of course,
they will always do 10 times, not even 10 times, infinite times worse than we do. And it partly is because we're the good guys. And we had, was it Doug? Yeah, Doug Padgett, who was on the other day, who's a progressive evangelical pastor who is trying to peel Republican religious voters off using, religious arguments. And some of what we discussed was one of the concerns I always had about the religious left was basically they're lefties, and they're not the lefties of the 1980s who were fighting for revolution in Nicaragua. They're kumbaya lefties. They're nice religious people. They're the religion I was brought up in. Like Greek Orthodox, which it's like Catholic, but without the anger. So we didn't learn any of that bullshit in church. We didn't. We just learned love thy neighbor. Every sermon was about loving thy neighbor. And it didn't deal with abortion or gays or anything else, right? And I think the religious left is very love thy neighbor kumbaya-ish, which is great, but it's not the fire and brimstone of the religious right. And it makes us unequal.
I don't want them to hate people like the religious right, but I do want them to fight.
But there's an unequal in terms of the fight. Well, Cliff, we've talked about this too, where fighting is considered, fighting is consired bad. Fighting is considered Republican.
Right. No, fighting has to be good. And I think I should mention, I really don't care about the Democratic Party as a party. Like I've never been a Democrat, and it's just a very practical. I really don't care about parties, but I don't pretend to be I'm basically exclusively voting for Democrats, or there are certain local races that are nonpartisan. Like I'm not voting for Republicans. I'm not playing the centrist, but I don't really care about the Democratic Party in the sense that if I saw a better path, if we fixed campaign finance and did away with first past the post and a whole bunch of things were different, I'd support whoever I thought was the best messenger and channel through which progressive, socially democratic change could be made. So I don't have, there's a bunch of different issues on which Republicans and Democrats are not significantly different. And there's a whole bunch of issues on which they are very different. And right now I see most of the opportunity coming through Democrats. But for people in your audience who may not know me, I'm not even a Democrat and I have no affiliation with the Democratic Party.
But it doesn't really matter.
No, at this point, it doesn't make a difference.
No, it doesn't. John, I won't speak for John, but I end up, I'm a PR and ad consultant. It's for Democrats because Democrats are the ones who are closest to my beliefs. It's not because I always will be a Democrat. And, if the Democrats became the party of Southern Democrats, I would not be back in the day. Yeah. So I know what you're saying. Right. I have more of an affiliation than you, but in the end, it's as a vehicle.
Yes.
And I think we use it interchangeably. Cliff and I use the phrase Democrat interchangeably with liberal, because also, what's the freaking phrase? Are we liberals? Are we progressives? Now AOC and company have taken over the word progressive. So but I'm not them. I'm not socialist. I'm just not. And that's our social. I don't even think they're not. I don't even think they're social democrats.
Well, this is a whole other. I don't even know that we want to open up this.
But what label do you even use for people?
There's such a misunderstanding among many about what socialism even is.
Oh, I know.
That's.
But I think even on the American left, here's something, and again, that always drove me nuts. And Cliff and I've talked about this too. The fact that American socialists call themselves democratic socialists rather than social democrats. And my Swedish friend had said to me once, it was my Swedish friend, a friend of mine who was very involved in Swedish politics, national politics. And he had said to me once, he asked me, he goes, why do Bernie and all these other guys keep talking about, being democratic socialists? He goes, those were the bad guys here 30, 40 years ago. They were the crazies who liked the Soviets and stuff. Social democrats are the ones that you all claim you like because you like the Northern European system. That's social democracy. It's not democratic socialist. And
it's a form of capitalism. It's a highly regulated,
very regulated capitalism.
Yeah.
Well, but it's also my point. Wait, Cliff, real quick though. My point is the phraseology. We go nuts because you'd rather use a word with socialist in it than social democrat. You're an idiot in America if your messaging is democratic socialist and not social democrat. Because you've got two words people can handle in one, and you've got bad words in the other. And it's just, again, we both do a lot of marketing work.
I come at it from a messaging perspective, which is, when you're saying stuff that people have only heard from very authoritarian governments, then you're branding yourself in a way that makes no sense to me. Whereas social democracy, I think, at least if you follow this stuff, you immediately think of Scandinavia and things that I embrace.
Programs.
That I'm not a socialist. I am a social democrat. I believe in capitalism, but I think it should be very much regulated. I don't know.
Which Elizabeth Warren even
that's my
said.
view.
Even Warren.
I don't have a problem. I'm fine with markets allocating resources in many areas. But there are areas where I think we need to say we need exceptions here. And so when we talk about public education, when we talk about healthcare, I think there's an interesting case to be made about basic access to housing and food. That's a conversation where we say the market may not give us what we need. It probably doesn't. Right. But I don't need to either socialize or even have the government involved in directing resources when it comes to the production of beach balls or mobile phones or whatever.
Or the David Pakman show.
Right. Exactly. Sure. Yeah, of course.
I'm just, that's what I always say is that I wish the government were a lot more involved especially with larger businesses. And we were breaking up monopolies, which are completely skewing the marketplace in so many horrible ways. It's the small businesses that I think should be allowed to thrive. Obviously, I'm not saying there shouldn't be regulations. Of course there should be. No discrimination and all sorts of things. But I that's where I'm not a socialist, I guess I'd say, and I'm more of a social democrat. But I think in the end, David, you and I would probably not be as far off as you think we would be.
No, I don't think we'd be that far off. Yeah.
And Cliff, I don't know if you've got any other substantive questions. I shouldn't say substantive, but a political question. And I wanted to maybe end with asking David, and this may be too obvious of a question that it's too hard to answer. What is the secret to your success on YouTube?
I have no idea.
Do you even know, or it just worked?
Here's the thing.
It just worked? I mean,
I think it's basically...
Are you just so compelling a personality? No, I'm having fun with you.
I think that if the content is truly terrible, there's no way to rescue it and to grow it. But if you meet a certain minimum level of quality content, which I think I meet, I don't think I'm the most compelling by any means, but what I think the difference maker is consistency and sticking with it, right? I've been doing this more than 10 years. And now we have almost 1.5 million subscribers. Right. But after our first year, I think we had 7,000 YouTube subscribers. And a lot of people would give up at that point. Because
you've been doing YouTube for 10 years? Your show?
Yes, indeed.
Jesus,
in fact, 12.
Okay, that's impressive.
A lot of people would say, I've got 7,000 subscribers. If I just add 7,000 a year, I'm not getting anywhere. But the point is, that's not how things scale. That's not how things grow. So the biggest bummer for me is a lot of people come to me and they, ask me for advice about what to do. And the first thing I say is, you're not even producing content reliably yet. You need to first figure out, I'm doing X number of hours or videos per week or whatever, and then do it for 5 years and see where you are. There's just a lot of people that aren't that committed to stuff. And so, now that we're at the upper end of the hockey stick and we're hiring more people and so on, it's all fun and games, but you have to be able to tolerate that first part where it's slow growth. That's honestly 90% of it in my mind.
And you've been doing a podcast a day? Sorry, Cliff, but is your podcast, do you ever overlap them, or is your podcast totally separate from your YouTube?
It's the exact same thing. So we do an hour Monday through Friday, and then that gets chopped up and put on YouTube.
Oh, okay. God, I thought maybe you were doing a podcast too. I was like, holy shit.
No.
Okay. Sorry, Cliff, what were you saying?
No, I was going to say, the thing I've always been, while we've got David here, I'll embarrass him. But, what I was always very impressed about, and I said this to you, John, when you told me you were booking him, I'm like, hey, I know David. Having met him at certain conferences, trial lawyer stuff, and some other things, is he adopted early, which I think is a huge thing with YouTube when other people are sort of like, hey, what's that? You sort of checked it out, you researched, did what you need to do, and said, this is something we can grow with. But you professionalized it early. And I would say, that's the second thing. And the third, what you said, you stuck with it. And a lot of people, I know this because I do PR. So I'd have progressive clients with books or, politicians or whoever. I'd want to book them someplace. And I'd call up, half a dozen podcasts. And a lot of them would be like, yeah, I don't know what's going on. We may be doing one next week or in a month. And we may have some guests. David, I'd call up and he'd put me in touch with his booker because he had professionally realized that he couldn't do it on his own with what he was trying to concentrate on, had somebody doing the booking, scheduled it out, and had a very consistent, as you're saying, I'm doing an hour a day. And frankly, if you think about how businesses are successful, that's how they're successful. Is you create a brand, you create content where people know what they're getting, how much they're getting, they know when they're getting it, and you professionalize it in a way that things aren't going to fall through the cracks. So you deserve a lot of credit. I think you're modest, and that's great. You're a good guy. But you do deserve credit in that you didn't just fall for the back of a turnip and say, hey, what do you know? We've got a million subscribers. You put in the work.
Definitely.
You turned it into an actual business model, or you professionalized it and you just say, how much money can I grab immediately? And you're Jewish too. So I would have thought you, no, I'm just kidding.
A lot of it is systematizing stuff and saying, we have a bunch of equipment sitting in a room and we've got our team, but let's actually organize this into a flow and a process and really take it seriously. And that's 90% of it.
So Cliff,
you've done it and you deserve it,
I was going to say, Cliff, 7 more years of the podcast and we're going to make it big.
That's what I'm saying. I mean,
well, the thing is, all of these things it's the typical S curves, and if you read about the growth of a lot of businesses, there's this acceleration and then there's a leveling. And then what you do during the leveling is what sets you up for like this period we're in right now. I consider to be, we're kind of consolidating and building infrastructure so that when the 2022 election comes, we'll be even better positioned to grow more quickly.
Let me ask you, and I don't mean to turn this into a whole masterclass, but having said that, it's interesting to me, and I think it would be interesting to people. If you're going to get into this, and I think this probably applies to, TikTok, anything else you get into as well, doing video or podcast audio as well, although podcast a little different with just audio. But do you have to go as professional as you have? You in essence have a studio. And I think even for me, that scared me to some degree. I mean, Cliff and I doing our stuff, right? We've occasionally we tape this, of course, and I'll put it up there. But I find when we put our taped stuff up there, it does okay. I mean, our video, unless it's Mary Cheney, by the way, Cliff, Mary Cheney's the one that people really like. And it's the one that YouTube always limits the ads on Mary's stuff. Interestingly.
No, you mean Mary Trump, don't you?
Mary Trump, not Mary Cheney, Mary Trump. Sorry.
I haven't talked to Mary Cheney.
Yeah. She wouldn't come on.
No, I mean, here's my view on that. I always think if I have the option of doing something today that I would call a 7 out of 10, or spending the next 4 months and starting in 4 months at a 9.5 out of 10, I would rather start today at a 7 and have 4 months of data 4 months from now.
Interesting.
I would always prefer that. It's the one thing I really learned in graduate school and business school was the push cart method, which is don't spend a year signing a lease for a huge restaurant before you know whether anybody wants the food. Just put a food cart out there next week and start building. So you really only need, a Blue Yeti microphone, which is $130, and a $160 Logitech Brio camera, and for $300 you can start putting stuff up on YouTube, and before you know it, you might have 500 subscribers, and then you build off of that.
Right. Yeah. That is interesting because I will say, although I think the internet, honest to God, we really could do a whole broadcast on this at some point because I think it is really interesting. The blogging in the 2000s, right? Which, I had one of the big liberal blogs. And what was interesting about that was it changed as I was writing it because I started seeing it wasn't in a bad way. It wasn't like I said, hey, what the hell? The money's here. Let's go that way. It was more seeing what people liked and what they maybe weren't into. And all of a sudden I started blogging about my orchids because people liked it. And so all of a sudden it got a little more personal. And it was sort of, it's the same thing happened when I was at Children's Defense Fund. I'd started doing a lot of online advocacy for them. This was like the mid 90s when things did not exist like that. And started sort of this email list of theirs that again morphed into something different because people started writing us back and saying, Helen did a new childcare bill update. Could you send that out? And I thought, shit, I ought to mention Helen's bill in the next update. And all of a sudden they wanted legislative updates. So I started doing it. But you find, and I will say, Cliff, I don't think we've got enough of a sense from our podcast of that kind of feedback. But sometimes you can get the feedback that shows you, oh, this direction you didn't even think of is the way this tool or this project is now trending. But it's an ongoing iterative process. And so a few years ago, I said, let's just see what would happen if I did a live stream. And then now live streaming is a totally separate business that does really well for us. But there's 5 other things I tried that went nowhere. And so you abandon them when you identify that that's the case. Right. You're constantly kind of evaluating and judging that. Which makes it fun if it works. It's just, I think it can be frustrating because it's not always obvious and you're kind of going, and you've got the problem too of the people you hear from are self-selecting in a way. So like even doing polls of our listeners or polls of our audience, we were trying to poll people to find out if they wanted shorter or longer podcasts because our podcast tends to be, and we'll let you go because I know we promised you an hour, we've done about an hour 15 now. That's our typical podcast length. I asked people and said, would you rather have us do 20 to 30 minutes? Because Cliff was advocating that.
3 times a week kind of thing. Yeah.
And of course our listeners went, no, but I started telling Cliff, I was like, but is that because our listeners listen to a podcast that's an hour and 15?
Right. Well, so one thing about that is sometimes it's not that the audience doesn't know what they want, but to give you an example, regularly when we ask people what types of stories they want more coverage of, international and foreign policy is always at the top.
Interesting.
And the stories do terribly whenever we do that. So there's a disconnect. And it's probably
we want our vegetables.
The people that are answering are not the majority of the audience.
Yeah.
Or they're giving you, like I said, we think we should all eat vegetables. They're giving you the answer they think they should be giving you.
That could be. That could be. No, that's interesting.
That's hilarious. That is hilarious.
We think Ecuadorian literature from the 17th through the. I know what you're saying.
Right.
The other thing I was going to say about that is even the failures I think are super valuable because, and I realized this when I was just casually having conversations with people over the last year with small shows that want to grow. And I would hear them say, I'm thinking about doing this thing or that thing, things I had already tried and failed at. And I realized I now have a list of things that aren't likely to work. Right. And when I tell someone else that lets them skip way ahead in their development process. And that's super valuable too.
That's great.
You're very slow on your show and you're not as slow here. What's that about? Is it intentional?
I don't know. I have no idea.
I was telling Cliff, because I mean, I've watched your show before, but I pulled up something, I don't know why, this morning. And I would say David Pakman talks a little like this. Whereas John, I would have given 5 times the number of words in that discussion. And it's something that I've always wondered about. Listen to NPR. I mean, NPR is certainly slower and more reasoned. And it's clearly not the way we talk. Bob Cesca talks a little more that way, I would argue.
It may be that when I'm laying out ideas just by myself, I'm thinking through them as I do it. Whereas maybe because this is more conversational, it has a different cadence.
That's true.
That would be my guess.
If it's you alone, you're right. Because if you're thinking alone, you might be. Well,
John, when you think you're trying to lay out policy or trying to lay out something like that, you're kind of stopping along the way. You want to make sure you kind of get it right. Whereas now we're just kind of throwing it back and forth.
But it also makes me wonder about what works. I've always wondered whether people want, whether it's easier for them to listen to somebody speaking slowly. I tend to I can't stand it. I don't mean yours, but generally speaking, if I meet, and talking with you here, you're not slow at all. But when I meet people who speak slowly, I want to pull my hair out.
Sure. We've all been to dinner parties. Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're anticipating. Well, you're anticipating every word they're going to say, and you're like, "Oh my God!" But it's made me wonder whether for doing online media, if slow is good and welcome, because that, for whatever reason, works better for people. For older people, it does. I know my mom. My mom goes nuts. She's like, "Slow down, stop it. Tell me again what you just said." Like you do get to that age where all, at least for that demographic, you can't talk like me. I mean, that's a given. Yeah. But mom would love you. She's like, that David kid, I understand him. All right, David, we will let you go. This has been great. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Exactly. That's the endorsement you needed.
Seriously.
Yep.
Always great seeing you, man. Thanks for being here.
Okay, good luck. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Chip. Remove David Pakman. Oh, there we go. All right. We're not going to report. Now it wants us to report David Pakman. We're not going to report David Pakman for removing him from.
No. We don't need to do that.
He is so interesting. I'm glad we had him on. I mean, I really, I'm intrigued, Cliff, because I did suspect he was going to be far to the left of us, and I would almost say I don't even know what his. First of all, if he is supporting European democracy, social democracies, he probably is to the left of me. I don't have a problem with them, but if you say that
it would depend on specific
framework,
issues, because on a number of things, from education to healthcare and whatever.
Healthcare,
I believe more in their model. Do I in everything? No, probably not. So it depends. But I don't think he's as far to the left of us as you would think.
No,
I think he is what I really like about him. Is again, it's really more stylistic.
He's reasonable.
That's what I mean. When you get to sort of when it's angry. Sort of populism of calling people out and demagoguery, then it's divisive. No matter what your ideas are, no matter how far to the left they are. And I admit, I get caught up in it because I do. I don't do it with.
Sorry. What? I moved you on the screen. I moved you on the screen because the way my computer works, if I'm looking at you, it has me looking the other way. So I moved you to the other side, and of course, what did it do? It had me looking again the other way. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just saying I try. That's the side I aspire to. And I admit when I feel like people are nasty and show up in bad faith, then I still go after them and I want to tear them apart. But I think we're better served when we say we disagree on stuff. It doesn't mean you're evil.
He's the PBS.
It doesn't mean you're bad, you're evil, I'm, you know, whatever. It means we're going to disagree on some things, but like we're all coming from similar places, and let's try to remember that.
But I love that he's a Bernie guy who basically said, you know what, Biden's our best chance. Let's go for it. That is the epitome of what I like about him. Of a reasonable,
mature, like person politically, because that's what I.
But also very to the left. He was a Bernie guy.
Yeah. Right, but if Bernie had been our nominee, I would have supported him.
Yeah,
you know, like it's looking at something, you know, reasonably and saying this may not be exactly who I wanted, but it's better than the alternative.
And the best way of getting what we want now is this. And then, but it's a very, but it does. And we'll see. I'm going to see. Maybe I'll even break this show up a little bit because I think it is interesting to me to hear him. God, we could do a masterclass with him on how to, you know. I know some of you listening may not care what makes his show work, but I think, God, there'd be a big audience out there that would love to hear David Pakman's tips for what makes things work online, because it is very mystical, I think, to some degree. You know, I think we found that ourselves. Even Twitter, Cliff, right? I mean, Twitter. I found my Twitter followers increased a lot from 2016 to 2000. Excuse me, leading up to Trump's election, like that year, they quadrupled. So during the Hillary-Trump fight, and then they stagnated, and they've been stagnated since then. And it's weird.
It's hard to know. Mine shoot up sometimes, then stop. Then they, you know, I don't know.
You know, but it's. I think it's gotten more. I almost wonder whether it's gotten more difficult to understand the ebbs and flows on social media of what people are really thinking, what works. You know, it's a very. Anyway, it changes, but I
agree. I think it takes a lot of research and a lot of effort, and it's very hard to understand.
Yeah. Anyway, I like him. I wish he were closer by. He's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well,
David Pakman, 2 thumbs up.
Exactly. And I don't think there's much. I think we covered it all.
All right, guys. Today's Tuesday. I don't think we've got a guest yet for Thursday. Listen to me.
I know we do for the week after, but I'm not sure we do for Thursday.
We can tell people we've got Representative Richie Torres is coming back next week.
Yep, he was awesome.
That will be very good.
Actually, we can have that conversation with him. That would be interesting when you're talking about In the Heights. He's Afro.
If you want, I don't know if he wants to get into it, but I think maybe he at least knows what the discussion is between light and dark-skinned Latinos. Because
he jumped into the Israeli-Palestinian conversation, when a lot of people would have hidden under something. So I think he's the type to not shy away from talking about kinds of things.
Right.
We'll see.
All right, guys. We'll talk to you on Thursday-ish.
That's right.
Yep.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Take care, guys.